Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
This time, we're going back to 2011.
To revisit the movie that really, I think you could say, kicked off a whole saga.
Captain America, the First Avenger.
And we're diving deep into the making of this superhero classic.
You know, you sent over some great excerpts from the film's Wikipedia page.
So get ready to, go beyond the shield and uncover some really surprising facts.
It's really interesting, I think, when you look at these superhero movies.
Especially the origin stories.
They're not just about, superhuman feats and battles and all that.
Right.
There are so many, creative decisions, these small details.
Even historical influences that I think most people watching, don't even pick up on, but they all add up to create that final experience.
Totally. It's peeling back the layers of a comic book panel and seeing the artistry underneath.
Exactly.
And speaking of artistry, can we just talk about...
how did they transform Chris Evans?
Who's, completely ripped in real life.
Into pre-serum Steve Rogers.
It was amazing what they did.
It was a combination of, well, for one thing, some really clever filmmaking.
And then some seriously impressive, digital magic.
It's digital magic.
Yeah, they used this technique. I think they called it digital plastic surgery.
Okay.
To actually shrink Chris Evans down.
Wow.
In post-production.
How does that even work?
So it wasn't just about making him look thinner. They actually adjusted his, body proportions.
Oh, wow.
They smoothed out his features. Basically, they used these digital tools to create a younger,
less imposed
version of him.
That's incredible. It really makes you appreciate the level of detail
That they put into these films. But they didn't just rely on, CGI, did they?
No, they didn't just use CGI.
They also used a body double.
Oh, really?
A guy named Leander Dini.
Okay.
For certain scenes.
I see.
And get this.
They actually grafted Chris Evans' head on to Dini's body.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That must have been so strange for the other actors.
Were they supposed to look at Chris Evans' knees to have a conversation with him?
Well, it was a very technical process, to say the least.
Yeah.
The actors opposite Evans, they had to look at specific marks.
On his chin, believe it or not, to kind of simulate eye contact.
Oh,
and then to make sure that his eye line matched up.
Evans had to look at marks that they placed on the other actors' foreheads.
Wow. That's dedication.
They even used, platform
an apple box
to adjust for the height differences.
Wow. Talk about, dedication to the craft.
It was wild.
It really makes you realize how much work goes into those scenes.
That seems so effortless on screen.
Yeah.
But you know what else really blew me away?
What's that?
Hugo Weaving's performance as Red Skull.
Oh, yeah.
He was so chillin'.
Yeah.
And that voice, bone-chilling.
Did you know that he based that voice on Werner Herzog and Klaus Maria Brandauer?
It's true. He studied them both to create that accent.
Amazing.
He wanted to give Red Skull that, that distinct blend of intellect and just pure menace.
And it worked. Every time he spoke.
Shivers down my spine.
And speaking of Red Skull.
Hot mask.
It was terrifyingly real.
Was that practical? Or did they do something to it digitally?
Well, they started with a latex mask as the base.
But then the visual effects team, they digitally sculpted Weaving's face underneath.
Oh, wow.
To make it look like the skin was, stretched really tight over his skull.
Ooh.
It's really a great example of how practical effects and digital effects can combine.
To create this unforgettable look.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another group of characters.
That, while not wearing terrifying masks, were also essential to this film. The Howling Commandos.
Yes.
I love those guys.
They're the heart and humor of the film. A real band of brothers.
Totally.
And you know what I think is really interesting about them?
What's that?
They weren't just sidekicks, right? They each brought their own personalities, their own skills to the fight. They were a force to be reckoned with, even on their own.
Exactly. And get this.
Some of the actors actually signed on to this film.
Really?
Without even reading a full script.
Wow, talk about a leap of faith.
Right. They must have really trusted the director's vision.
They must have.
That's pretty amazing, right?
It is.
To sign on to a project like that.
With basically no information.
Shows how much faith they had in it.
Yeah.
And speaking of, great performances.
One that really stuck out to me
was Kenneth Choi as Jim Morita.
Oh, yeah.
He was fantastic.
He brought such a human face to that character.
He did, didn't he?
And I think it's even more impactful when you remember, the historical context.
Choi actually drew inspiration.
Really?
From the real-life Nisei soldiers.
Wow. I didn't know
These
that.
were Japanese Americans.
Most of in World War II.
And often faced such terrible discrimination.
Even as they were fighting for their country, you know?
Wow.
That just adds another layer to his performance, knowing the thought he put into it.
It does.
You know, it's amazing how those little personal stories
can add so much depth to a film like this.
Uh-huh.
But speaking of the film,
I was so surprised to learn that
Captain America was originally going to be a standalone movie.
I know.
It wasn't always a given
that he would be, you know, leading the charge.
In this massive interconnected universe, the MCU.
Right, right.
For those who don't know, that's the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Exactly. It's like really on. They were only planning on having like half the film set during World War II.
Really?
The rest of it.
It was going to be in the present day.
Wow. Can you imagine?
That would have been so different.
It would have been wild.
How do you think that would change things?
Like, for the character, for his relationship with Peggy Carter.
Right.
Would they even have met?
Who knows? And get this.
At one point, Jon Favreau.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The guy who directed Iron Man?
The one and only. No. He actually thought about making Captain America, get this, a comedy.
A comedy? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I love his work.
But Captain America.
Captain America telling jokes while he's fighting Nazis.
That's a tough one to imagine.
It is. It really makes you think about how different this film could have been. Okay, so Favreau, he's known for his humor.
Right.
But how would that have worked?
With a really serious historical event, right?
Right. Like, would it have changed the entire tone?
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thought. But anyway.
They ended up going with, you know, the more serious tone.
Yeah.
But even then, they did a lot of rewrites.
On the script.
Really?
Yeah. And Joss Whedon, you know, who went on to direct The Avengers.
Right.
He came in.
To do rewrites and, like, make sure that everything fit in.
It's like they were already planning ahead.
They were. They were setting the stage.
For this whole universe.
That's so cool.
It is.
But one thing that really struck me
was that they didn't actually show fighting actual Nazis.
Right. They focused on Hydra.
It was a really interesting choice.
It was. They wanted to explore, I think,
you know, the more fantastical
part of the Marvel universe.
Without getting too bogged down.
In, you know, real world stuff.
Oh, right, right.
It's tricky.
And honestly,
it worked really well.
It did.
Because Hydra, I mean...
with all their technology.
And their plans for world domination.
They make a really compelling villain, don't they?
They do. And you know what's interesting about them?
What's that?
I think they tap into...
some of our modern anxieties.
Really? How so?
Well, you know, like, think about it.
Unchecked technology.
The dangers of authoritarianism.
It's all there, you know?
Wow.
So it's like...
even though the historical context is there...
the film actually speaks to something...
the more universal.
The fight against oppression.
Exactly.
Wow. So from villains...
so let's move to the film's reception.
Okay.
So how was it received? I mean, it must felt amazing for everyone involved.
To see their vision come to life like that?
It really was a hit.
Both with critics
and with audiences. I mean, Roger Ebert...
he praised it. He really loved the films, you know.
Authentic feel, I think he said.
Yeah.
The 1940s.
And he also, you know, he's a big fan of...
director, Joe Johnston.
That's awesome.
What about at the box office?
Oh, it was huge.
Captain America. The First Avenger.
He was a box office smash.
Wow.
Which, you know, really cemented his place.
As, like, a major player.
in MCU.
I mean, it's incredible to think...
that this was just the start for him.
I know.
He went on to lead 2 more films, The Winter Soldier, Civil War.
Which were both incredibly successful.
Right.
Not to mention, like, his role.
In the Avengers movies.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how one film launched this.
Like, whole franchise.
It really is.
That continues to just... like
captivate people
all over the world.
And I think what's so interesting
in Captain America, he's become
this iconic symbol
of heroism.
Right.
He represents and resilience.
Especially in the face of adversity.
And it makes you think,
how do those themes...
patriotism, how do those resonate with today's audiences?
Right.
Compared to back then.
When he was, you know...
first kind of introduced to the world.
It's interesting, right?
Because, I mean, back then, during the war...
things seemed... I don't know.
A little more, I guess...
simpler,
yeah.
The lines between good and evil...
seemed a little more clear.
Right. But the world today...
it's so much more complicated, isn't it? There's so much going on.
It's hard to know
what's right and wrong sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like, he represents that ideal.
Oh, yeah, it's so easy to see these days.
Yeah, no, totally.
But maybe that's why we need him.
What do you mean?
Well, maybe we need that reminder
that there are things
worth fighting for.
That it's good to stand up.
For what you believe in.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Even when it's hard.
Even when it seems impossible.
Wow.
Maybe that's his real superpower.
Right.
Inspiration. To do better.
To do better.
I love that.
So yeah, maybe Captain America's legacy.
It isn't just about,
the fighting, the action.
It's about inspiring all of us to be a little more heroic.
In our own lives.
So I guess the question is,
what can we do?
Exactly.
How can we take that inspiration?
Make a difference.
It's about finding those small moments.
Oh, those opportunities.
To stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
That's what he would do.
I love that.
So, as you go about your day.
Just think about that.
Yeah.
Think about Captain America.
And that brings us to the end
of this deep dive.
We've gone from the page to the screen.
Uncovering all these hidden details.
And really exploring what makes this story so great.
And so impactful.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.